I wasn't snooping. That's the part one keep telling myself, the part I'll keep saying even if nobody ever believes me. I wasn't digging, I wasn't playing detective. I was just trying to finish a stupid presentation for work because my own laptop had decided to die on me the night before, and my wife had left hers open on the kitchen counter. No password, no paranoia, just sitting there, screen lit, humming like it was begging to be used. So I clicked, and that was the first domino. At first it was boring. Browser tabs with online shopping, some Pinterest boards, a draft email to her sister. Then I saw it. Right on the desktop, among all the normal little folders named things like Taxes 2022 and Vacation Pics, there was one that just said, Plan B. 2 plain words. Innocent enough, except they weren't. You know how sometimes your gut reacts before your brain? Like your body already knows the punchline is going to ruin you? That's what happened. My stomach turned to stone. My hands got clammy. And against every rational instinct, I double-clicked. I expected boring. Budget spreadsheets, maybe. Some half-baked diet plan. What I got instead nearly knocked the air out of me. Inside the folder were subfolders neatly labeled like chapters of a book: finances, custody, legal, new life. I swear to God my heart stopped. For a second I thought, this is just preparation, she's being practical, but the deeper I went, the uglier it got. The finances folder had spreadsheets detailing exactly how she would split our accounts, how much she'd siphon off, how much she'd demand in court, how much she'd hide in a new account I'd never even heard of. Custody was worse. She had notes about our kids' schedules, highlighted areas where she could claim I was too aggressive or unfit, even copies of text messages pulled out of context, like she was curating evidence. Legal had drafts of divorce petitions, filled out, signed, just waiting for a date. My chest was burning. My pulse was so loud I barely heard myself whisper, what the F*** is this? But the kicker? The folder called New Life. That one was full of photos. Screenshots of hotel bookings. Selfies with another man, one I recognized. A co-worker of mine. Smiling, kissing, casual like they'd been doing it for years. There was even a list titled To Do After Separation with bullet points: move in with him, change locks, file restraining order if necessary. If necessary. Like she'd already considered painting me as dangerous to make sure she won. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't a backup plan. It wasn't just insurance. This was a ****** ing playbook for my destruction, written by the woman who slept beside me every night. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the laptop. I slammed it shut and just stood there in the kitchen, staring at nothing, hearing my own breath rattle like I'd run a marathon. Every memory of our marriage started replaying in my head like a bad movie: the arguments, the silences, the way she'd been on her phone late at night smiling at something she wouldn't explain. And suddenly it all made sense in the worst way possible. She hadn't just been drifting away. She'd been planning this. Strategically. Carefully. Like I was an enemy she needed to outmaneuver. I grabbed the laptop again, reopened it, and started screenshotting everything, forwarding files to my email. My brain was in overdrive, a storm of betrayal and rage and survival instinct. I knew that if this folder existed, then she was already 10 steps ahead of me, and if I didn't act, I was going to be the sucker who got blindsided. That's when I heard the front door open. Her voice floated in, casual, humming. She was home early. I froze, laptop open, folders staring back at me like evidence in a trial. My hands hovered, sweat slick, and I had seconds to decide, shut it all down and pretend I'd never seen it, or confront her right there, raw and burning. And for the first time in our marriage, I realized I was terrified of my own reaction. Because part of me wanted to scream, throw the laptop, demand answers, and part of me wanted to play it cool, collect more, let her dig her own grave. The door clicked shut behind her. Her footsteps were coming closer. And I knew whatever I did next would change everything. Her footsteps came down the hallway like a countdown and my whole body was tight, buzzing like I was plugged into a socket. The laptop was still open on the counter, the folder glowing like a neon sign of betrayal, and I had half a second to decide. I slammed it shut, shoved it an inch away, and tried to look casual, but my heart was pounding so loud I thought she'd hear it. She walked in with a grocery bag in one hand, humming some pop song, looking every bit the ordinary wife who buys yogurt and bread on the way home. She set the bag down, looked at me, and cocked her head. "What's wrong with you? You look like you saw a ghost." My throat was dry. I forced a laugh that sounded like gravel. "Just tired. Work stuff." She studied me for a beat too long, her eyes narrowing like she was already suspicious, and that only made my blood run hotter. She reached for the laptop casually, like she always does, and my hand shot out before I could stop it. I grabbed it first. Too fast. Too obvious. Her eyebrows rose, her mouth curled into a smirk that wasn't innocent at all. "Since when are you so protective of my laptop?" she asked, voice dripping with mockery. My brain scrambled for an excuse, but I was too raw, too angry. The words came out harsher than I meant. "What's in here, huh? What the hell are you hiding?" Her eyes flashed, just for a second, but then she tilted her head back and laughed. Laughed. Like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Are you seriously snooping through my stuff again?" she sneered. "God, you're so paranoid. Do you ever hear yourself?" That word paranoid hit like a slap because it wasn't the first time she'd used it. It was her favorite weapon whenever I got too close to the truth. My fists clenched against the counter. "Don't gaslight me. I saw it. I saw the folder." She froze, the smirk slipping just enough to confirm everything, but then she recovered instantly. "Folder? What folder? Oh my God, you're insane." My voice cracked as I shot back, don't play dumb. Plan B, divorce papers. Custody notes. Him. Her face went pale for a heartbeat, then she leaned on the counter, crossed her arms, and smiled that venomous smile that made me want to break something. So you went digging. Classic you. You invade my privacy, twist things in your head, and then explode like a psycho. Do you even hear how abusive that sounds? My chest was burning, rage flooding me so fast I thought I'd black out. Abusive? You're planning to ruin me behind my back. You've been building a whole damn case against me. She shrugged, casual, cruel. Maybe because you make it too easy. Look at you right now, red in the face, yelling, grabbing my stuff. You're a walking exhibit. My vision went red. She was flipping it, twisting the knife, using my anger as her proof, and the worst part? She was right, I couldn't control it. My hands were trembling, my jaw aching from clenching so hard. Part of me wanted to throw the laptop through the wall. Part of me wanted to shake her until the smugness cracked. Instead I slammed my fist on the counter, hard enough to rattle the groceries. Stop f***ing with me. I roared. She didn't flinch. She actually smiled wider, leaning in so close I could feel her breath. Or what, she whispered. Go ahead. Show me who you really are. Make my life easier. The silence after that was suffocating. I could hear my own ragged breathing, the hum of the fridge, the blood rushing in my ears. I knew she was baiting me. I knew if I crossed that line, she'd have everything she needed to finish me. And still, I was right there, 1 inch from exploding. Somehow I managed to step back, teeth grinding, and point at her instead. I'm not stupid. I have copies. I sent it all to myself. That wiped the smirk off her face for real this time. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw tightened, and for the first time she looked rattled. You think that'll save you, she spat. No one's going to believe you. You're unstable. Everyone knows it. My laugh came out broken, hollow. Then I guess it's a thing war. Her smile came back, sharp as a knife. It always was. The rest of that night was a blur of pacing and rage, my body buzzing like it had been wired wrong, every cell screaming at me to do something. She stayed in the bedroom, door locked, probably texting him or drafting her next little evidence file, and I sat in the living room with her laptop glowing in my lap like a bomb I couldn't disarm. My own words echoed in my skull. I told her I had copies. I told her I wasn't stupid. That was only half true. I had managed to forward some screenshots to myself before she came in, but not everything. I hadn't even scratched the surface of what that folder held. And now she knew I'd seen it, which meant she'd either erase it or use it faster. My lawyer's voice in my head, don't confront until you have everything. But I was already way past that line. I wanted to kick her door in and scream until the walls bled. I wanted her to feel as cornered as I did. Instead I sat there shaking, typing like a lunatic, copying what I could, shoving files onto a flash drive with fingers so unsteady I kept hitting the wrong keys. Every picture of her with him, every line in those divorce drafts, every note labeling me as aggressive or unfit, I burned them onto that drive like it was my only weapon. And the whole time the other voice in my head, the toxic, raw, ugly part, kept whispering, why not end it now? Why not drag her out of that bedroom and make her admit everything? Why let her play lawyer and actress when I could expose her in one brutal move? My hands clenched so tight I thought the flash drive might snap. I tried to distract myself by writing notes, making a counterfile of my own, like if she wanted war I'd fight it smart. But the words I wrote down didn't sound smart, they sounded paranoid. She's lying. She's setting me up. She's going to steal everything. I knew how that would look to anyone else, like the ramblings of a man unraveling. And maybe that's what I was. Around 3 a.m., the bedroom door creaked open and she walked out like nothing had happened, hair tied up, pajama shorts on, sipping water. She looked at me sitting there with her laptop and smirked. Still at it? You really can't help yourself, can you? My jaw ached from grinding my teeth. You're insane, I muttered. You're ****ing insane. She laughed softly, like I'd just complimented her. Keep saying that. Write it down. Maybe it'll sound convincing someday. I wanted to launch the glass on the table straight at her head. I didn't. I dug my nails into my palms until I felt skin break, tiny crescents of blood. She shook her head, almost pitying, and went back into the bedroom without another word. That smug calmness, that control, it burned me alive. She wanted me to be the monster, and the sickest part was how close I was to giving it to her. I barely slept. The next morning I called in sick to work and drove straight to Diego's place, flash drive in hand. He's my brother, the one person who's seen me at my worst and still answers my calls. I dumped everything on his kitchen table, photos, spreadsheets, texts, and told him everything. He swore under his breath, rubbed his face, and said, "You need a lawyer, not fists." I knew he was right, but hearing it made me want to hit something. She's already building a case, I snapped. I can't just sit on my hands while she paints me as a monster. He leaned forward, staring me down. Mark, you are a monster if you lose it. That's what she's counting on. Don't give her the show she wants. I hated how right he was. I hated how much I didn't trust myself to do it. I left his place with the drive burning a hole in my pocket, my mind racing. I told myself I'd go to a lawyer that day, file first, make the move. But the second I pulled into our driveway and saw her car parked there, the plan dissolved. I walked inside and she was sitting at the table, calm as ever, scrolling her phone. She looked up, smiled sweetly, and said, "Did you sleep well?" Like nothing had happened. Like we weren't on the edge of war. That fake smile snapped something in me. I slammed the flash drive down on the table so hard she flinched. "I've got everything," I growled. "You're not taking me down without going down with me." Her eyes flicked to the drive, then back to me, and instead of fear or guilt, she laughed. "Oh, Mark," she said, shaking her head. "You really don't get it. You don't need me to destroy you. You're doing that all by yourself." My fists clenched, my vision blurred, and I realized in that moment she was right about one thing: I couldn't control myself. And that scared me more than anything. I slept like a bone for 2 hours at most and then woke up like the world had been rewired wrong, every sound an alarm, every light too bright. I drove to the lawyer's office with the flash drive in my pocket like contraband and a head full of rehearsed sentences. The woman who'd been recommended by a coworker sat me down, nodded at the screenshots, and didn't make the mistake of moralizing. She made spreadsheets of the law. "You file first," she said. "You get your records preserved. We get a temporary order if necessary. Don't engage. Let the process do the work." Her clarity felt like an 4 drip of calm. She warned me about the 2 traps my wife specialized in: gaslighting and spectacle. "If she can make you act, the narrative is hers," the lawyer said. "We lock the facts down, then let the law speak." I left with more paperwork than hope and with a small set of concrete steps that felt like a plan rather than a cliff edge. For the first time since the folder, I had a script: file, preserve, wait. That afternoon I called my boss and explained I might need a few days. He was sympathetic in the way bosses are when it's messy but not dangerous to the bottom line. I emailed the screenshots to myself again and copied them to a cloud account with 2-factor authentication. Paranoia makes you professional, apparently. I installed an old webcam I had lying around in the living room, angle low, just to capture comings and goings. If she wanted to run a theater, I wanted receipts. I told myself none of this was dramatic. It was paperwork and tiny, careful moves. Then she started to play. It was gradual at first, little public displays that tasted like cruelty. A photo of her at a coffee shop with the tattooed guy, both of them captioning the post, "New chapter sparkles." A flurry of comments from accounts with names like BraveGirl23 and Survivor_Sam praising her for being so strong. People I hadn't spoken to since college liked and hearted it. My chest tightened. The first real escalation was a small thing that felt like a match. She showed up at my office building during lunch. Not inside, she knows the restraining orders and the optics, but in the lobby, smiling into her phone like she was filming a POV. She walked up to the security desk, flirted with the guard, then turned the camera so my building's name was in frame and said something casual about bumping into old ghosts. A coworker sent me the clip before I even had time to process it. I watched myself on a 10-second loop, me walking into a meeting 2 hours later, people whispering, someone's eyes flicking in that particular pity and judgment way that had ruined men before me. I wanted to rip the lobby apart. My hands went cold. I called my lawyer who told me, again, do not engage. Save it. We add it to the record. So I saved. I breathed. I did the adult thing. And then she did something that was so specifically designed to hurt it felt surgical. She posted a video that played to the worst thing I'd ever feared. She compiled clips, old fights, my angry face, a wedding cake smashed in my hand at some frat boy bachelor party 5 years ago, and edited them together with captions. "This is the man who raised his voice in our house. This is the monster I left." The comments filled like blood into a wound. People I barely knew messaged me with disgust and, "Are you okay? And you need help." The algorithm turned me into a cautionary tale overnight. I sat on my couch in the dark and watched my life become fodder. That's when I realized she wasn't content with private victory, she wanted public obliteration. She wanted to own the narrative so completely that even my lawyer's paper would look like a footnote. I doubled down on calm the way you brace for a storm, more documentation, emails to HR explaining the smear campaign, a copy of the cloud folder sent to a trusted friend. The lawyer filed the preservation order, we had the signatures and timestamps. Then she crossed a line I hadn't expected because it was so petty it hurt in a new place. Our son's school sent a note saying a parent had reported concerns about domestic volatility and they wanted to have a check-in with us. The image of my kid sitting in a fluorescent room with a counselor asking about yelling made bile rise in my throat. She'd called the school anonymously and fed them a narrative that fit her performance. That was the point where my plan to be cool became brittle. I wanted to go to the school, rip out the anonymous complaint, and pound it into pulp. I wanted to grab her by the collar and make the truth so visible you couldn't edit it into anything else. Instead I did the thing the lawyer said to do. I documented, I emailed, I asked for camera logs, I demanded records. I felt like a man building an ark out of receipts. The more I complied, the more the machine felt like it was cannibalizing me. Consequences chewed me in slow, legalistic bites while she curated pity. And the worst part was how she did it with such casual cruelty that sometimes I felt manipulated into hating myself. One night she stood in the doorway while I was packing a bag to stay at my brother's. She wore one of her camera smiles, the smile I'd fallen in love with before I learned how sharp it could be, and she said, "You really think being the strong silent type will win this? People like a story with a monster they can point at. Be honest, Mark. You know you're capable." I felt like a man dangling over a pit and she was the one holding the rope and sawing it slowly. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor with the flash drive and the laptop and rehearsed staying sane like a mantra. My therapist told me to name the impulse, call it out when it comes. So that's what I did that night. Every time I felt my hands tighten, I said out loud, not today, like a spell. It helped some. Then she went full theater. She organized a meetup for her followers at a weekend market and put our name on it as a cautionary tale. No, she didn't use our names, but enough hints that anyone who knew us could figure it out. The tattooed guy was on stage beside her, both of them smiling like conquerors. A dozen people came up to me later and asked in hushed tones if I was okay, their eyes full of the same mixture of horror and confirmation that had been pouring into my inbox for days. I felt like an animal in a glass zoo. The provocation was intentional and merciless. She wanted to see if I would crack. And 1 year of living habitually on the edge taught me how close I still was to snapping. The test became whether I could be measured, whether I could be adult enough to let the law do the work. I wanted to be measured. I wanted to be the man who proved her wrong by not becoming her villain. But wanting something is not the same as having it. At night I would wake from dreams where I was bending steel bars with my hands, and in those dreams I always felt both monstrous and pitiable. The next morning I woke to a new DM, a video from an anonymous account showing a grainy clip of me from the previous week, me yelling into my phone in the car, raw and ugly, captioned, "See? It's in his blood." That was the last straw. I wanted to delete everything, to disappear, to burn the city down that made a spectacle of humans. Instead I called my lawyer, repeated the list of provocations, and asked her for one thing I hadn't wanted before: make the next move before she made the next show. Make the law move fast. Because I could feel the animal inside me sharpening claws in response to the public knives. And the more she pushed, the more I realized the only thing that would save me from becoming the monster she wanted was to be smarter, slower, and, disastrously, more patient than the rage that lived in me. The crowd of emotions tore out of me like a physical thing, a muscle I hadn't used in months suddenly flexing with memory. I felt the old reflex, the one that had once solved everything with yelling and a slammed door, rise like bile. For a second I almost moved without thinking, a step forward, a voice that would have shredded whatever was left of reason. But something younger in me, maybe exhaustion, maybe shame, maybe the memory of the lawyer's calm hand saying, "Document, don't react," put a hand on that rage and forced it down. I stayed where I was, breath heaving, watched her through the distance like a star I no longer trusted, and my mouth tasted like metal. That night the headache came like a verdict. I went home pretending to be composed because our son still needed to believe his world was steady. I made dinner, mechanical motions, and watched the television like a man who's trying to learn to live with a scar. Later, when the house fell quiet, I opened the flash drive again and stared at the files until the names blurred: custody strategy, evidence timeline, post-separation finances. The cruelty of it kept landing. She had not only planned a way out, she had planned a way to make sure I paid. She cataloged my faults like a collector. The thing that made my stomach drop was that in some places, her notes were terrifyingly true. She'd highlighted where I'd lost my temper in small ways, where I'd been impatient, where I'd been careless. She'd framed normal human failures as cannon fodder for a courtroom. It sickened me that she could take my worst bits and arrange them into a weapon. It sickened me more that I could not wholly deny that those worst bits existed. I booked a second meeting with my lawyer the next morning and told her about the anonymous school note and the meetup. She tightened, a look that belongs to people who understand the machinery of reputation. "We move fast," she said. "We get emergency injunctions about the school, we file motions to have any recordings preserved, and we subpoena the meetup platform for IP logs. She's weaponizing child welfare concerns, and that's dangerous. We'll get a temporary order to stop harassment." The law was a blunt instrument, but it moved in a way my rage could not: slow, precise, surgical. I liked that part of it and hated that I needed it. Between court calls and evidence collection I tried to be a father. One afternoon my son wanted to build a fort with blankets. He shoved a pillow on my lap and declared me the king of the fortress. I almost cracked, almost let the kingdom be about me, but I settled into the small theater of play and held that role like a fragile thing. He poked my knee and said, "Daddy, are you okay?" My throat closed on a sound that wasn't quite a lie. "I'm fine, buddy," I said, and I felt the truth of the sentence like a splinter. Being fine is a slow work. The campaign of little barbs from her continued. She started leaving subtle notes in places: a coffee cup with a lipstick ring on the table she knew I'd see, a blurred photo posted anonymously that looked suspiciously like a late-night text I had once angrily typed and not sent. People began whispering with the easy cruelty of internet-fed gossip. Friends I thought would stand by me sent lukewarm messages that tasted like fear: "Hope you're getting through this okay." A woman from the PTA, someone who used to smile at me at the school bake sale, approached while I was volunteering and asked, low and gentle, "Is everything really okay?" I saw the worry in her eyes and the way it was now coated with caution. It stung like an animal. It felt like the world was rearranging itself without asking me. There were nights I wanted to explode. There were nights I wanted to go to her front door and scream with the rawness of a man who'd been betrayed. But in the sober hours, I set out a list of rules for myself, absurdly adult things: never go to her home alone, record all interactions, have a neutral witness if any conversation is necessary, only communicate through lawyers about legal matters. It felt like building a new life out of scaffolding. The scaffolding kept me upright, but it also looked ugly. Then came the thing I didn't expect: an entry in the new life folder that made me stop breathing, a scanned email from my bank showing a transfer request in my name for a large amount to be moved to an account in her alias. It was timetabled for a date months from now, March fallback. She'd laid plans not just for narratives but for hitting me where it would hurt my savings, my stability. I called her that night, hands trembling. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a message that was supposed to be calm and legal: "We need to discuss finances. Lawyer is CC'd." No answer. I stopped sleeping. I started drinking at times I knew I shouldn't, not enough to black out but enough to blur edges. I scoured banking records, called the bank, froze accounts where possible. I filed emergency motions. The lawyer kept telling me the paper trail mattered. It did. It was all that did sometimes. But there was a darker calculus running under everything: if the law saved me, it would also make a case history out of my weakness. Every recorded meltdown could be presented later as a pattern. Every late-night voicemail of mine, raw and begging, could be framed as proof of instability. The knowledge of that potential weaponized every failing I had ever had. It made me cautious to a fault, sterile in my emotion, which in its own way hurt because I wanted to feel, to rage, to grieve. I wanted to be messy with the truth, not neat for a courtroom. One rainy afternoon, a new message arrived from an account I didn't recognize, a video clip, grainy, with subtitles. In it, my wife stood on stage at one of her meetups, voice small and trembling as she told a story about a man whose anger ruined everything. The camera panned to the crowd that cheered and the tattooed guy who clapped like a showman. Then the clip cut to a screenshot, one of my emails, the one where I begged her not to do something stupid earlier that month. She had used my plea as evidence of instability, the raw human need turned into proof of pathology. I sat in my car and watched it until the wipers blurred the pixels into static. The cold, hard truth settled like frost. She had thought of everything. She'd built a scaffolding not just of logistics but of perception, and perception is the currency of verdicts. In the end, the war she wanted was not something I could win with volume. It was a battle of documents and witnesses, of living clean and careful enough for the truth to look plausible. The rage in me wanted to burn it all down and let the fire decide. But I'd seen what the fire did to me, the way it left my hands shaking, covered in current evidence, and the law, ugly as it was, gave me a path away from being consumed by my own hands. So I chose the tedious path, receipts, subpoenas, witnesses. I chose the slow work of being less spectacular and more stubborn, because surviving this meant living long enough to tell the true story. And the truth, however boring or ugly it might be, was the only thing that might save my life. Court moved like a glacier, slow, cold, unavoidable. Every morning I woke and put on a face that didn't tremble, handed my lawyer lists and timestamps like sacrificial offerings, and went into rooms where other people decided whether the story I lived in would stay mine or be edited into someone else's highlight reel. The judge asked questions in that detached tone that makes you feel like an animal in a glass pen, and I learned how to answer without letting the vitriol strike through my words. Please state your name for the record. Describe your relationship with the defendant. Were there prior complaints filed? I said things I'd rehearsed until they sounded like facts and not prayer. Custody is about stability, I am employed, I have witnesses who can speak to my character. The motions were paperwork wars. She filed counterclaims, alleged emotional distress, alleging I'd been the danger. Her lawyer had the kind of practiced sympathy that reads well to juries, small nods, soft eyes, the voice of someone who sells scripts about survival. Every time they played one of her clips in court, my stomach went hollow as if gravity had taken a day off. The camera loved her face. The camera hated mine. Outside, people whispered like they held a verdict already. Inside, I listened to the tape of my life being edited. It's a strange, terrible feeling watching footage of yourself that looks like a stranger and wanting to reach into the screen and shake the truth out of it. The worst days were the ones where my defense had to confront the parts of me that were true. The transcripts my wife presented had my angry voice. Yes, she had archived messages where I'd snapped. My lawyer could contextualize, but context is a slow salve in a world that wants a headline. Between hearings I lived in forms, financial affidavits, parenting plans, subpoenas. I sat with social workers who assessed parenting patterns like they were grading a project. They asked me to list things I do with my son, to prove routine. I wrote down the stupid, human stuff, pancakes on Sunday, a silly song we invent, a walk to the park where we count dogs. It felt ridiculous and essential at once. The other side tried to weaponize every mistake I'd ever made, a time I yelled in traffic, an old DUI from a decade ago that had been legally resolved but still looked shiny and damning in their binder. I sat and watched them press those stains into the public record, and it felt like watching someone brand you with someone else's iron. I wanted to rage. I wanted to scream that redemption is a process, that man is not a clip, that a lifetime can't be reduced to a highlight. But legal strategy required the opposite, calm, submission to process, the dull daily work that makes headlines boring. So I did it. Sometimes the restraint felt like victory. Other times it felt like a surrender of self. There were temptations that landed like landmines. A woman in the grocery store would say something flippant about men who lose control, and for a moment I felt that old muscle twitch, clinch, spring, strike. I'd breathe, name the trigger out loud in my head and step away. The nights were worse. Sleepless, chewing the edge of decisions. I kept emergency numbers in my contacts, Diego, the lawyer, my therapist. I made a rule, if I felt a surge, I would call one of them before I did anything public. That rule saved me more times than I can count. Still, the law does not move because you have good intentions, the law moves when tangible threads are pulled. My lawyer filed for expedited discovery requesting IP logs from the Meetup platform, bank transfers, DM metadata. We served subpoenas. The internet has a memory, it leaves traces like breadcrumbs, and we began to gather them. One late night the IT guy from the platform called me in a small, tired voice. We have logs showing that multiple accounts coordinated to boost those videos on purpose. They used VPNs, sure, but there's a payment trail. My pulse stuttered like freedom. The evidence that my wife's movement had been professionally coordinated to craft a narrative was one thing. The evidence that third parties had been paid bots, accounts, manufactured witnesses was another. It meant motive beyond romantic betrayal, it pointed to PR, manipulation, a plan with craft behind it. We subpoenaed the tattooed guy's accounts and God bless the sloppy, he'd used a work email for one of the behind-the-scenes payments. The receipts tied him, in a way that made my lawyer grunt with satisfaction. It didn't erase the clips of me shoving him and the broken glass, but it reframed the context. We dropped a motion to admit the manufacture evidence into the record and the courtroom went cold like someone opened a refrigerator. For a second I allowed myself a small elation as if, finally, the scaffolding she built might rot on its own. Then the counterpunch came. She produced a therapist who'd written about me years ago, before the worst of our fights, noting anger issues and escalation patterns. That document landed like a sledge. The past has teeth, it chews you up when people cite it without mercy. I realized the case wasn't going to be clean victory, it would be a bloody negotiation where little pieces of dignity were bartered for practical outcomes. Outside court, the pressure became literal. Someone smashed my car window one night and left a smear of red paint across the hood with the words, "Be careful what you make us." Violent threats like that are designed to rattle, to flip your head into panic. I reported it. The police asked questions with the same tired faces. I gave statements and stayed silent on social media. My son asked once why people looked at us funny at soccer practice. I wanted to invent a new universe just to keep him from seeing this one. So I lied in the smallest, gentlest way and said, "Because we're famous right now, buddy." People stare at famous things. The days blurred until one afternoon I got a call from my lawyer that changed the air. The bank had frozen the questionable transfer pending our legal review. The meetup platform had handed over IP logs that suggested coordinated boosting and a payment trail. A witness who'd been on camera at the meetup reached out, terrified, embarrassed, and said she'd been paid to stand and clap for my wife. Little victories, yes, but the kind that cost nights of sleep and hairline fractures. The worst moment came the day the judge asked me directly whether I thought my son would be safer with me or his mother. My throat closed so hard I tasted iron. I chose words like scaffolding, careful, firm, not melodramatic, and I said what I believed. I am the person who shows up. I am the one who keeps schedules. I am the one who makes sure homework is done and that we eat dinner together. He wrote that down like a clerk. The ruling that week was a split temporary joint custody with supervised exchanges if tensions rose, and in order to preserve digital evidence and refrain from public smear campaigns. It was not exoneration. It was not the clean vindication I wanted. But it was breathing room and a stop to the most egregious online orchestration. I left the courthouse hollow and relieved in equal measure, like a man who's survived a storm but whose house still leaks. I walked to my car and sat with the steering wheel and cried hard, ignorant tears you turn away from when you're building a life piece by piece. Back home, the apartment felt smaller, the ghost of the smashed lamp still in the corner like a monument I couldn't afford to demolish. She posted that evening anyway, pictures of her with a sympathetic caption, and the comments rolled. The order would hold, but culture moves faster than courtrooms. That night I called my therapist and said, plain and raw, I did not break. He paused, then said, you said the truth in court. The rest is process. Sleep. Don't let the sound of her voice decide whether you exist. I tried. I really tried. But the mind is a traitor. At 3 a.m., after a bad dream where the tattooed guy laughed at me from the stands of my life, I nearly drove to her building. A breath, a fistful of keys, a hand on the wheel, then I called Diego instead. He came over and sat with me in the kitchen, no words, just coffee, and a presence that held me from tipping. You did the hard thing today, he said finally. You didn't snap. That was the truth that would have to suffice for now. The legal war was one thing, the inner war was another. For the first time in months I recognized that being not the monster required more than anger management classes in lawyers. It required humility, the kind that makes you swallow rage and call a friend and sleep on your hands. The battle lines were set, truth in documents, lies in the feeds, custody in limbo. I lost a lot of sleep thinking about the next move. I gained a subpoena. Both felt like instruments with teeth. The story wasn't over. It had only turned into a marathon that would demand endurance, patience, and the constant policing of a temper that wanted, always, to make headlines on my behalf. The court order was supposed to slow things down, but it didn't kill the circus, it just changed the tent. She couldn't smear me publicly without risking contempt, so she got cleverer, private groups, closed circles, whispers that sprouted in places the judge couldn't reach. Screenshots from friends trickled in, her posts cloaked as support where she never said my name but everyone knew who she meant. Leaving a toxic situation is terrifying, she wrote. But sometimes you have to do what's best for your soul. Hundreds of likes, comments, hearts. I scrolled through them at 2 a.m. and felt the blood hammering in my temples until the phone almost cracked in my hand. I wanted to scream into those comment sections, to tell each stranger what she'd really done, to shove the receipts into their faces. But the lawyer's voice echoed in my head, silence is evidence of control. Rage is evidence of guilt. So I bit my tongue until it bled. At home, the silence was poison. My son asked fewer questions now, sensing more than I told him. One night he asked, Dad, why do people think you're bad? I froze with his bedtime book open, words blurring on the page. I told him, because sometimes people only see part of the story. He nodded like he understood, but kids don't deserve partial truths. After he fell asleep I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and punched the tile wall until my knuckles screamed. That's when I realized I was one mistake away from becoming her evidence. I wrapped my hand in a towel, cursing myself, whispering over and over, don't give her what she wants. The next week the provocation escalated. She accidentally bumped into me at the grocery store, her phone conveniently angled in her hand. She stood there with the tattooed idiot by her side and said loud enough for everyone to hear, please stop following me. Shoppers turned, eyes sharp, whispers immediate. My chest went nuclear. I wanted to grab the phone and smash it, to shout the truth until the aisles shook. Instead I froze, every muscle twitching, and walked away with my fists jammed so hard into my pockets I left bruises on my thighs. 2 aisles later I collapsed against the cart, gasping like I'd run miles. I called Diego. He told me to get out of there, come to his place. I did, but the image of her fake fear burned into my skull all night. The legal process ground forward, motions, hearings, evidence, and every step was a tug-of-war between my self-control and her theater. The judge warned her about violating the order, but warnings don't erase public perception. At work, colleagues whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. One day I overheard someone say, that's him, the one from the videos. My stomach turned to ice. I wanted to quit, crawl into a hole, anything but live as her caricature. My therapist kept drilling the same mantra into me, you are not what they say. You are what you choose to do. I repeated it like a prayer, but every choice felt like suffocation. The boiling point came at a custody exchange in the school parking lot. She arrived late, of course, with the tattooed clown in tow, both of them smiling like it was a performance. She handed over our son with a sugary, "Be careful, sweetheart," loud enough for the teachers nearby to hear, and then turned to me with that smirk that meant war. "Try not to scare him this week," she whispered. My son didn't hear it, but I did. The words hit harder than fists. My hand shook so violently I nearly dropped his backpack. For half a second I imagined grabbing her by the wrist and spitting every ounce of venom I had in her face. My jaw ached from clenching. She wanted it. She wanted the explosion in front of witnesses. And God help me, I almost gave it to her. But then my son looked up at me with those wide eyes, clutching my hand, and the rage buckled under the weight of his small fingers. I swallowed it whole and walked away without a word, every step like dragging chains. That night, alone, I finally cracked, not in public, but in private. I screamed into a pillow until my throat tore, slammed my fists into the mattress, sobbed like a man gutted. And when the storm was over, I sat there in the dark, shaking, terrified. Not of her. Not even of losing. Terrified of myself, of how close I'd come to handing her the bullet she'd been loading for months. The days after the parking lot exchange felt like walking on shards of glass, every step a reminder that one wrong move could cut me open. I kept telling myself I'd held back, I hadn't snapped, I'd protected my son from seeing his father explode, but the truth was uglier. I'd come within a hair of giving her everything she wanted. That knowledge sat in my chest like acid, eating through whatever scraps of pride I had left. Sleep became a rumor. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, rehearsing confrontations I knew I couldn't allow. I'd picture grabbing her phone, smashing it, screaming the truth in her smug face, and then I'd see the courtroom again, the judge's eyes, the smug lawyer's voice reading Exhibit A. My therapist kept saying, "Name the feeling, then let it pass." But it didn't pass. It squatted in me, day and night. Then came the escalation I should have expected but still hit me like a freight train, cops at my door, again. Not with handcuffs this time, but with a copy of a new complaint. She'd filed another report, claiming I was stalking her, saying she'd seen me lurking near her building, that she feared for her safety. She described my car in the statement. My car. I hadn't been near her building in weeks, but there it was, black and white, her words stamped official. My lawyer told me to stay calm, to let her handle it, to trust the process. But my body didn't understand process. My body wanted war. My fists trembled as I held the paper, veins bulging, teeth grinding until my jaw hurt. I paced the living room like a caged animal, whispering to myself, "She's framing you. She's setting you up. She won't stop until you're in chains." And then came the temptation, the dark idea whispering louder than reason. So what if I give her a real reason to fear me? The thought scared me because it didn't feel foreign. It felt natural, like slipping into an old coat. I slammed my hands on the counter, breathing hard, on the edge of a spiral I knew I might not come back from. That's when the phone buzzed. An unknown number. A video attachment. For a second I thought it was another one of her stunts, another clip doctored to make me look like a monster. But when I opened it, my blood went cold. It was footage from inside her apartment. Grainy, low angle, but clear enough, her and Tattoo Boy laughing, kissing, staging one of their little fear clips. I watched as she rehearsed the line she'd later deliver online, perfecting the tone of trembling victimhood while he nodded and filmed. At one point she even laughed mid-sentence, then restarted with fake tears. The video had a timestamp, recent. My hand shook as I replayed it, over and over, my rage twisting into something sharper. Proof. Real proof. Not screenshots, not suspicion. Proof she was manufacturing the whole goddamn narrative. I didn't know who sent it, maybe someone on the inside, maybe a friend of a friend who'd had enough of her games, but it was a lifeline. I forwarded it to my lawyer immediately, fingers trembling. She called me back 5 minutes later, voice tight but electric. "This changes everything," she said. "Don't react. Don't confront. We file this. We get it authenticated. This is the crack in her armor we've been waiting for." My chest heaved. For the first time in months I felt something like power, not the violent, destructive kind, but the kind that came from truth. But mixed with that power was the dangerous itch. Now that I knew, now that I had proof, the urge to storm into her apartment and shove the video in her face burned like wildfire. I wanted to watch the smirk drain from her lips. I wanted to see her crack the way she'd made me crack 100 times. I sat there, gripping my phone, pulse racing, on the edge of either salvation or disaster. Diego came over that night, unannounced, and found me pacing, muttering, clutching the phone like a weapon. He grabbed me by the shoulders and said, "Mark. You've got her. You finally got her. Don't F*** it up by giving her what she wants." His words cut through the haze. I collapsed into a chair, breathing like I'd just run miles, tears stinging my eyes. For once, the rage didn't win. Not yet. But as I stared at the video, at her fake tears and staged lines, I knew one thing for sure, this war wasn't over. It had just turned in my favor, and that made me more dangerous than ever. The day we put that video into evidence felt unreal, like watching a movie where you finally see the villain take off their mask, except this was my life and not a script. My lawyer filed an emergency motion to admit the footage and had it authenticated by a digital forensics team. They traced the upload, confirmed metadata, and proved it hadn't been doctored. For once the math and the timestamps lined up with my gut. The judge allowed it in under a preliminary hearing and the courtroom got quiet in that way rooms do when the audience knows something important is about to happen. My wife sat across from me like a queen at a trial, composed, lipstick perfect, the kind of posture that reads innocent to TV viewers. The tattooed guy hovered near her counsel, looking sheepish when the cameras pivoted his way. When the video played on the screen, I felt a physical reaction, like heat running under my skin, her laugh as she practiced sobs, the way she coached the guy to angle the camera, the rehearsed tear that never reached her eyes. The gallery gasped. Half the spectators reached for their phones while others sat frozen. The prosecutor, our lawyer, had brought in a neutral counsel to present the fabrication angle, played it slowly, pausing on frames where she reset her expression. Her lawyer's face drained. For a second I allowed myself to breathe. The clip didn't erase the night I shoved him or the shards of glass on my floor, but it put the motive under a microscope. This wasn't a waking affair, it was production. It was narrative engineering. The defense tried to pivot old behavior, predisposition to anger, pattern. They were right about parts of it and mercilessly effective at making old sins look like future threat. But that staged video fractured the foundation of her campaign by showing intent, manipulation, and a willful crafting of victimhood. After the footage came out publicly through our lawyer's channels, carefully released to avoid spoliation, social media flipped. People who'd once cheered her began to step back when shown the raw rehearsal. The comments shifted tone from "she's brave" to 1,000 small, shaky waits. It was vindication and also terrifying because vindication meant this fight would continue in public for months. The hearing became a grind of experts and witnesses. We had a forensics analyst testify about timestamps and audio anomalies. A woman who'd attended the meetup admitted she'd been paid and felt guilty. A tech guy traced boost payments to a shell account linked to the tattooed man's employer. Each testimony felt like strikes hammered into a dam. When cross-examination came, my wife's face moved through colors, fear, defiance, anger, like scenes in a cheap play. She tried to recover with the old line about my temper, and the judge reminded the jury, we had no jury yet, but the gallery mattered, that past conduct does not excuse present fabrication. The momentum shifted. But the relief was complicated. The video cut both ways. It proved she orchestrated smear, yes, but it also added a whole new layer of ugliness to what our son had been exposed to. It proved that the person who told stories of being frightened had been rehearsing the frightened act for strangers. How do you explain that to a child? How do you hold the scenes together after you've seen them pulled apart on a screen? The press exhales and inhales contradictory stories. Some outlets ran with the fabricated hero angle and highlight reels of her staged crying. Others ran backgrounders on my history of anger, dredging up fights and old bar videos as if contextless clips were evidence. The internet is a blunt instrument. The judge issued temporary protections, stricter limits on her public campaign, preservation orders on both sides, and a referral for mediated custody review. It was progress. But then the unexpected happened. The tattooed guy hired a flashy lawyer and, in a twist that felt like a bad punchline, he claimed he'd been pressured by me, that my past outbursts had scared him into playing along initially and that he'd been manipulated into helping stage things to keep us all calm. The testimony was shaky, inconsistent, and smelled like backpedaling. Defense counsel used it to muddy the waters and remind the court that people are messy and motives are mixed. Watching his face on the stand, half defensive and half terrified, I felt that old animal in me wake up. I wanted to lunge across the railing and throttle him for lying, for being coward and co-conspirator either way, but I sat still and let my lawyer object and let them handle it. The tactic was to make the narrative two-sided. She's a plant, yes, but everyone is a liar, everyone has skeletons. It worked to a degree. The old sins they kept bringing out whispered like ghosts, a bar fight here, a harsh text there, a neighbor who remembered an argument that ended with a slammed door and a child crying. Even with the staged video, the public and the court kept seeing me as a man with a fuse. I learned a hard lesson in that courtroom: truth is partial medicine. It doesn't erase the past. It only shapes the future insofar as you're stubborn enough to keep bringing receipts and wise enough to not hand the other side more ammunition. By the time the hearing wrapped, the judge opted for a careful, ugly compromise: supervised custody exchanges for the foreseeable future, mandatory counseling for both parents, and an order that neither party could publish or broadcast content relating to the other or the case. It was not the knockout I dreamed of, but it was a stop to the worst spectacle making. Outside the courthouse, cameras and microphones awaited like vultures. A reporter asked me how it felt to see the video finally prove she was faking things. My voice was hoarse, honest when I could be, relief, but also grief. It doesn't undo what happened. The next day she posted a single message, short, clipped, no tears, no long theater. This isn't over, it read. And that was the part I'd been learning all along: even when you get proof, people will still look for reasons to prefer the simpler story. My hands were still shaking, but now with a different tremor, one that carried a thin, bright thread of hope. I wasn't out of the woods. The feeds would eat and regurgitate and the fight for my life and my son would continue. But for the first time since that desktop folder glowed at me in the kitchen, I felt like I had something solid to hold onto. The problem was, holding onto evidence isn't the same as healing. It's a start, but the real work, rebuilding trust, managing the rage, keeping a kid's world intact, was still ahead, and I was exhausted. That was a stray symbol of how tired my brain was, but I kept breathing and, for once, didn't let the animal running under my skin pick the fight. When the dust finally started to settle, it didn't feel like triumph, it felt like crawling out of a burning building with nothing but the clothes on my back. The video had cracked her mask, yes, and the court order slowed her theater, but the damage had already been carved deep into the walls of my life. People don't just forget the headlines, the whispers, the staged sobs. They don't erase the image of me as the angry husband because one clip showed her laughing at her own fake tears. Reputation doesn't heal in a week, it limps for years. My lawyer said we had leverage now, that custody could tilt in my favor if I stayed the course, documented, behaved like a saint. Time is your ally, she told me, like patience was a weapon I could learn to sharpen. I wanted to believe her. Some days I did. Other days I woke up with my heart racing, fists clenched, teeth aching from grinding in my sleep. Therapy became less about surviving her and more about surviving myself, how not to let the version of me she wanted to paint become the one I actually was. My therapist made me say it out loud once: I have anger. I can be violent. But that's not all I am. It felt like swallowing glass, admitting both the danger and the possibility. My son was the only thing that kept me grounded. The first supervised exchange after the hearing, he ran into my arms like none of it mattered, like I was still just his dad. His innocence was a knife and a bomb. I held him so tight he squeaked and I whispered into his hair, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." That moment became my anchor. Not the court, not the videos, not the smear campaigns. Him. One night, weeks later, Diego and I sat on his porch drinking stale beer, and he said, "You scared the S*** out of me. There were nights I thought you'd give her exactly what she wanted." I nodded because it was true. I'd come within inches of it, more times than I'd like to admit. "But you didn't," he added. "That's the difference. You held the line." I stared at the streetlight and let his words sink in. Maybe survival isn't clean. Maybe it's not about being vindicated or washing your name spotless. Maybe it's just about refusing to become the monster someone else scripted for you. My wife or ex-wife, as the papers would soon read, still had her followers, though fewer now. She still posted vague quotes about healing and strength, still painted herself in pastel colors. I stopped looking. The obsession almost killed me once, and I wasn't going to feed it again. The final custody review is still ahead, and I know the fight isn't over. The internet never forgets, the court never moves fast enough, and the scars don't fade overnight. But I've got evidence, I've got a kid who believes in me, and I've got a stubborn refusal to be her villain. Maybe that's not redemption. Maybe it's just survival. But sometimes survival is enough.